Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Charlie Dixon. And today I'm joined by Erin Williamson. Erin is the Chief Programs and Strategy Officer at Love146, a leading organization working to prevent child trafficking and provide holistic care for survivors. Erin brings over 2 decades of experience in social services and criminal justice, with deep expertise in human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. She holds a master's in public administration, is a licensed clinical social worker, and currently serves on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services National Advisory Committee on Sex Trafficking of Children and Youth in the United States. Through her leadership at Love146, Erin is helping to drive innovative survivor care and prevention education programs across the country. In today's show, we explore how Love146 is working to prevent child trafficking and support survivor healing through education, advocacy, and trauma-informed care, while challenging misconceptions, confronting digital age risks, and equipping communities with tools for real change. Erin, thank you so much for coming to the show. It's a welcome to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So to get us started, can you first share what drew you to this type of work and what your early experiences abroad gave you a firsthand look at child exploitation?
Yeah. So, even as young as high school, I was working with children kind of who had various needs. And so for my study abroad in college, actually, I went over to Kenya and I was with this just amazing group. And as part of the study abroad program, you went off for your last month and did a research project and you could choose what it was. And I had become really captivated by these children who were living on the street and, really young children. I mean, we're talking about, 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds. Sometimes you'd see younger with their parents, but oftentimes you'd see pretty young kids by themselves or in groups. And so I started working with different organizations that worked with these children and started talking with them and hearing their stories. And one of the things that struck me was when I spoke with the girls, a lot of them talked about how in order to stay safer, because it wasn't necessarily safe for them to live on the streets, but they usually stayed in a group of girls and there was a single older gentleman that would basically sell them for sex and in turn offer protection, because they said the worst situation was when law enforcement would arrest them, because oftentimes law enforcement would threaten to arrest them if they didn't perform certain sexual acts, arrest them anyways and put them in jail. And there wasn't a separation between juvenile and adult jails. So they were incarcerated with adult males, and it was really a horrific experience. And so after I graduated, went and worked with street children in Mexico and saw very similar things where you would see a lot of tourism, a lot of children coming back to the program that I was working with images of themselves that weren't appropriate, talking about, visiting, sitting on different people's laps and getting money for it and things like that, visiting with different men that had come into the area. And so then I went back to the States and really focused on child sex tourism and was just boggled my mind how much was out there on that. And then from there, really did the typical thing that many of us do, which is I kept thinking, it's over there. This is something that happens over there, right?
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden, we kind of come face to face with the fact that it isn't just over there. It's happening here as well. And that's where I really started focusing on trafficking here in the United States.
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point, because just as you were sharing your stories, I'm thinking, those are things that don't happen here. That's, in other countries. That does not happen here. That child sex trafficking, that's not a thing here in America. And I'm sure that lots of people feel that way. Can you talk to us a bit more about, what it looks like in America and what do you wish more people understood about its presence here?
Absolutely. And I think it's very common for us to think this doesn't happen here. The movies reinforce the idea of it's a white van that drives up and kidnaps you, right? All of the horrific things that those of us in the field then spend years trying to, undo all of the stereotypes that exist. Because the reality is that traffickers are looking for individuals that they can form a trust with, form a bond with, that they can exploit. And the same way when we're talking with youth, I often say, if you went out on a first date with someone and they punched you in the mouth, you wouldn't go out on a second date with them, right?
Nope.
That's not how intimate partner violence works, right? The
Right.
same thing is true for trafficking. I think a lot of us think, well, why didn't they know? The signs were so obvious. Well, that's because the trafficker at the first time is saying, you want love, you want trust, you
Mhm.
want somebody that you can rely on who will always be there for you. That's who I can be for you. And so they find whatever that child is looking for. Sometimes that child's coming from a family where food and housing are really, it's insecure, right? And
Yeah.
they're looking to have more of their basic needs met. Sometimes they're growing up in a foster care system and they're looking for a family, or one of their parents isn't present and that trafficker offers to be their father or their mom. We've seen couples traffic kids. We've seen
Mm.
couples that have said to children in the foster care system, "We're a safe place. You can come to our house if you ever need to run away." And then they turn and they flip the script on them and they start trafficking them. It really is that first couple of period, that grooming period,
Yeah.
really does take place in trafficking to form that bond, so that by the time these kids are being exploited, a lot of times those kids felt like, well, I made choices. And those traffickers have information or pictures that they can use as leverage against those children.
Absolutely. And you really speak a lot about the idea of what we think a trafficker looks like, what we're told on TV and in media. And I know growing up, we was the stranger danger, right? The people that we see passing us in a van and they're just going to snatch us up and take us away. But it doesn't sound like that's really the reality. What should parents, educators, even other youth workers, what should we understand about who traffickers really are and how they operate and how we can educate our children to not be caught up into these?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to remember is that predators oftentimes go for people that are already in their circle, right? So the reality is that a lot of trafficking is also familial trafficking. So we will see parents, we will see aunts or uncles, we will see older siblings trafficking children in their care, in their families. Sometimes that has to do with, again, the lack of basic resources. Sometimes it's very overt, and the parent is actively, selling their child. Sometimes they're not asking questions. So we've had youth where the parents aren't asking how the child's able to get them $500 at the end of every month to help out with rent. Sometimes they might assume maybe that kid's dealing drugs or that kid's doing something else, but they're not asking the question, but they are benefiting
Yeah.
financially.
Mhm.
And sometimes we have really young kids at really young ages being trafficked by their parents. I will say, many of the kids who are trafficked, not all of them, but a notable portion of them have experienced prior sexual abuse. And so, again, traffickers are looking for who's the vulnerable kid. And if you're thinking, and I hate to say this, but if you're thinking as a business person, with traffickers would say that that's how they think. If
Yeah.
you have a child that already knows what's expected of them, how to keep secrets, that person is going to be just easier to exploit. So we do see, I think, if you're working with children, anytime there is a history of sexual abuse or sexual victimization, for sure, they're going to need some protective factors around them, and they should get some education on healthy relationships, boundary setting. What do they do if they find themselves in not a great situation? But the reality is that traffickers are meeting our kids online. They're meeting our kids
Mhm.
at schools. We've seen
Yeah.
peers recruiting peers. I mean, whenever you open up the newspaper and you hear about, who's taking advantage of children, oftentimes it's a person that's in a place of power or privilege or proximity. And the same is true for traffickers.
Absolutely. You bring up of something that, and I was wanting to discuss this, just in the digital age that we're in now. Kids have access to social media and the internet and lots of different access to people across the country, across the world, that I know in our ages that we did not have access to. And it really brings me to a story. I live right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and a teenage girl in our area last year was trafficked by a guy. She was upstanding citizen. Her parents were, highly involved in the education system. She was a cheerleader, straight A student. But this guy found her online and she was really stressed out. She was overwhelmed. And he kind of talked her through, groomed her, like, I can help you. I can be there for you. Your parents don't understand you. Came
Yep.
all the way from St. Louis to pick her up from here. And so it really, before that, of course, I knew. I'm a social worker. I've worked in the school system. So I knew that these things existed, but to have it happen kind of like in our back door with not a child that necessarily appears to be vulnerable. She, like I said, she did not come from a family that on the outside struggled with anything. They did well financially and they lived in a nice house, all of those things. Nobody really could comprehend that this was happening to this young girl when they found her. How do we teach youth to navigate those types of risk? I mean, I don't know how, if they really understand what, the trouble that they're putting themselves into when they've been exposed to any and everyone, on social media. She thought he was a teenage boy.
Absolutely. And I will say, I have a teenager and a preteen right now that
Yeah.
I'm raising myself. And I am surprised at how little education goes on in the
Yes.
schools around internet safety, right? And
Yeah.
I think a
Yeah.
lot of parents assume that teachers and educators are addressing these issues in school when they're talking about other safety issues. Or sometimes educators will even say, oh, we address internet safety. But if you actually dig deep to what that means like we teach them not to share their passwords. We teach them not
Yes.
to post their address online, right?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
really talking about the same type of grooming and recruitment that we're talking about and the same type of manipulation that can take place
Mhm.
online. AI, for example, has totally changed the what people can do in terms of images and creating images to use as blackmail. It used to be sextortion had to be done with an image that someone actually took. Now we're seeing
Right.
sextortion happening with totally made up images. And
Right.
it's really scary how no one's really talking with this about kids. I think there is this assumption, well, parents should talk to kids and tell them.
Mhm.
But the reality is that most of us who are parents are not that tech savvy and we don't
Right.
know what's happening with the kids. And,
Right.
I do this for my job. My husband is in technology. He's a pediatrician. And the amount of time we spent trying to figure out how to lock down our house and what we should do for our own children, being as highly educated and saturated with information. I mean, I called friends that were, used to go undercover with the FBI to get advice. Like I had deep advice and it was still
So
unbelievably
hard.
difficult.
Mhm.
And I remember my husband saying, oh, well, the computer he has, it's from school. It's fine. And I
No.
one day I told him, go type in vagina. And he did. And he went, whoa. And I said, yeah.
Yeah.
So a kid's looking up Virginia for an article and misspells it. And that school computer gives him access to all of that.
It definitely does. And a lot of times what the school computers are only protected from, going on specific sites at school or at the school internet. And again, I have a preteen, so I get it. And a lot of his friends, my 11-year-old's friends, my parents are like, oh, well, he can't, same thing. They can't get on anything at home. I'm like, girl, yes, they can. It's on your home Wi-Fi. So if you haven't installed any way to, lock down those things, they have direct access really to whatever. There's no way to really, stop it. And a lot of the school-based computers, you can't necessarily install your own safeguards on. So you've either got to do it through your Wi-Fi at home or, just remove the device from your child, period. So it really is just this really tough space as a parent and a former educator, because the teachers and school staff are like, well, we have taken care of what they can't search at school. The rest is on you. And then at home, we're like, well, what do? We don't even know the things that kids can get into. And then even when we lock it down, sometimes I know I've seen other children be able to, go bypass all of the
Oh,
safety nets
yeah.
that their parents have put in place. And so not even thinking about it as a risk feature, just as oh, I want to do this, so I'm going to do it.
Right.
It's a very tough place to be, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, if we're not proactively talking to youth about what they
Mhm.
might encounter online, how we equate it, if you go on our website on the top, there's a bar you can click to sign up for parent emails. And in that, we give advice to parents at different
Nice.
levels, really around technology, because we get the question a lot of like, well, when should I introduce technology and how? Right?
Mhm.
Super common question. And there is no one size fits all, right? It depends on your family structure. It depends on where you live, the situations. There's a lot of reasons. But one of the things that we kind of use as our example is, well, you wouldn't go and drop your kid in New York City and like be like, I'm going to be back in 2 hours. Good luck. right? That's not how this works,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
When you first get a child and you want to teach them how to cross the street, you do it on a safe street and you hold their hand and you
Hmm.
talk them through, we're going to look both ways and this is why we're going to look both ways and how. And then as they get older, you might like let go of their hand, but you're still watching them and talking them through. And but the idea is like at some point that kid's going to leave your house and ideally they can navigate any intersection, even an intersection in New York City, right?
Right.
But
Right.
you
Yeah.
don't just start them there. And I
No.
think with the internet, the sense that I get when I talk with a lot of parents who aren't familiar is, well, we'll just give them full access. And then if and when something goes wrong, then we'll reel it back. And it's like, no, 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 my love. You
Mhm.
need to start with some very clear boundaries. And then as they start getting used to it and their brains start developing, then you open it up. You're right. I'm not saying that by 18 and 19, we don't want kids to have generally the access that they will when they leave your house. We want them to be able to understand that, but you don't want that at 13 or at
No.
12 or whenever you're going to introduce, electronics to your kids because they
Yeah.
just don't know how to navigate that stuff yet.
Right. Absolutely. So let's shift gears just a bit and talk about Love 146. Tell me more about it. What is it? What do you guys do?
Awesome. So yes, we are an anti-trafficking organization, and again, just like my story, we started over there. We started in Southeast Asia, really working. We actually have kind of like a partner organization in Southeast Asia that we support that works with children, both boys and girls who have been trafficked. I should note that a lot of the kids over there are trafficked through males in the United States and Europe seeking things to happen online, right? And directing the abuse through the internet. And then we have programs here. We have a prevention education program called Not a Number that's in a ton of schools. It's also in a lot of after school activities, juvenile justice. Really, the idea is kind of how do we teach kids what a healthy relationship is and practice skill building, right? It's a lot about skill building because, kids know drugs are bad. Kids still do drugs,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
The idea is like kids know going to a party or talking to someone they know online isn't smart. But how do we actually get them to the point of what happens if and when you're in this situation, right? And what are the skills you can use and the resources you can tap into? And then we also have a program that works with youth who have experienced sexual exploitation and trafficking. And that's really working with them and their parents and caregivers and whoever's their other providers about understanding what is this type of trauma? How does it manifest? Why is it so common, for example, for kids who've experienced trafficking to continue to run away or to return to their trafficker? It isn't that situation of like, oh, we've rescued you and now everything is great. That's not the reality of working with this population. And so we
Right.
provide really specialized services as providers that understand the unique dynamic that comes along with this type of victimization.
Wow. Okay. I want to dig deeper into the work that you guys do with young survivors. How do you guys help them make sense of and I'm putting in air quotes for those listening in, the choices that led to this exploitation? You spoke about earlier that children don't necessarily, while they aren't necessarily making the choice, they feel like they've made the choice to introduce themselves into a situation that, turned negative later. How do you help them figure out that the choices weren't not necessarily things that they made, that they were set up to make? And then again, how do you engage their families in that healing process? Again, I mentioned that the girl in my area, and it almost is like I won't say that they kind of disappeared, but they haven't been seen. They were all over social media before, and she was, a very popular child. She's kind of gone. And so I wonder how families can be engaged to not just, repeat or stop repeating any type of negativity, but then how do you heal through that process so that I know the child won't necessarily be the same anymore, but how do you, start over with that child? How does that work?
Yeah. So I think the first part of kind of how we work and why I think we're so successful is really meeting that child and those parents where they're at, right? In a non-judgmental way. So a lot of times when we're talking with youth, we'll say things like, we're not saying anything like that we talk about has or will happen to you, but this is what's happened with other kids that we've worked with. And so we kind of give them permission to share or not share whatever they want to as part of their experience, but still are able to give them the important information by using stories of other youth that we've worked with. And sometimes those are based on real facts. Sometimes those are hodgepodges of youth that we've worked with. But usually they're kind of targeting whatever the vulnerabilities were for that specific child. As you said, it's not always resources, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it can be, we've had kids where they've thought they were the perfect child. That was their image in their family, was kind of being that perfect child. And then something went wrong and someone got an image they shouldn't have had, or they shared a secret that they shouldn't have shared. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what would everybody say if I shared this image, or if I shared what you told me about what happened, between you and your brother, between you and your uncle, right? So sometimes it's a secret that's been shared, and they know that would be devastating for their family, and that would be devastating to their community, and they really feel like they have no choice. And so then they just get further and further along. So again, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, again, we're not saying this has happened to you. This is what's happened with other youth we've worked with that have found themselves in this situation. And then we really point out as we do these stories of, I remember I was talking with so-and-so, and they thought they made the choice, right? They made the choice to figure out a way to bring money in so that they could stay in the hotel. I'm just saying that their boyfriend at the time brought them to a hotel where trafficking was known to be happening, introduced her to his best friend and girlfriend. The girlfriend was also being exploited. And then all of a sudden, that girl came up with this idea all on her own. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but what I'm saying is he could have put her in a situation so that
Right.
that was the idea she came up with and led her to that. And then they'll be like, I was in this situation once where
Mm.
that kind of happened to me, right?
Yeah.
And with parents, it's also meeting them where that a lot of times we are dealing with families where there's intergenerational trauma.
Mhm.
Many times parents will say either something to the effect of like, that happened to me and I swore that would never happen to my child. How could I have allowed that to happen? And there's this feeling of guilt and this feeling
Mhm.
of shame and all those other feelings. Sometimes we'll have parents who said, that happened to me and I got over it. They need to get over it too. So, you really do need to meet that parent where they're at. And sometimes you need to help that parent figure out what do they need to deal with their own trauma so that they can separate out what's happening to their kid from their own stuff. And so
Absolutely.
again, the other thing I want to note is that our services are very atypical. We go out to kids where they're at. We provide 3 to 4 hours of direct work with the youth and their parents every week. It's
Yeah.
not your typical like sit down 1 hour therapy. And I
Yeah.
think that's really important for the population we're serving because a lot of them are distrustful of mental health providers,
Mhm.
have had bad experience with mental health providers, or aren't interested in that type of service. You kind of really do need to meet this population and their families where they're at because,
Yeah.
kids might not be ready for a sit down 1-on-1 hour. That might feel like too much pressure. Like I'm supposed to sit here
Mhm.
and share stuff with you and there's too much attention on me. And I don't really know you. I'm not ready to tell you everything. Yeah.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
Absolutely. Okay. Earlier, you mentioned the misconception that being rescued equals this huge recovery, and I'm just now everything is fine and beautiful, and there are no issues that come afterwards. Of course, we both know that that's not really how that works. Can you share what trauma responses look like for youth who've been trafficked or who have experienced trafficking, and how your team really helps them to rebuild that trust and regulation? Like you mentioned before, being able to come from a situation where you've been exploited and wronged, basically, by adults that you've trusted, really tears down that level of relationship, not just with that adult, but probably every adult in your life. So how does your team really help them to rebuild trust and figuring out who to trust and when?
It's such a good question. And a lot of our services are around mirroring to a youth what a healthy relationship is, right?
Nice.
So youth test us, right?
Mhm.
We're coming in, we're a new provider. We're here to talk about something super awkward with you. And you're a teenager. And like, who wants to talk about sex in general when you're a teenager, let alone, exploitation with just another person in your life? So you can
Mhm.
imagine that we are received with a lot of resistance, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
they want to test us and they want to make sure we know what we're talking about. And we both acknowledge that and support that, right? We say it's great. You shouldn't trust us. I just came into your life. I'm not saying you should trust me or tell me everything. I should have to earn your trust. That is okay, right? And so we're going to reinforce really good practices because, again, like you said, part of what happened is they did trust someone that they shouldn't have, right? But there
Yeah.
weren't necessarily warning flags. So you're trying to help them learn how do you navigate this. We oftentimes will have youth that will get mad at us, right? Because they wanted to do one thing today and it didn't work out for us, or we were 15 minutes late, or we had to cancel an appointment because something else came up. And again, you work through that. You teach a child that doesn't mean that has to be the end of our relationships. Relationships aren't all good or all bad, right? It's not. You can work through disagreements, and let's talk about that, and let's engage in repairing that relationship. And I think a lot of times it really is reinforcing what a healthy relationship looks like, while also talking to them about their other relationships and pointing out things that are really healthy about them or that they
Yeah.
might want to think about them, right? And I think a lot of times youth, they're told by their traffickers, and there is this sense that, like, oh my gosh, this horrific thing happens to me. Now all I am is this person who's
Mm.
experienced trafficking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm every word that I've been called that's a horrific word. No one's gonna look at me the same. I don't belong in this real world. I can't re-enter, right? I go back into high school. My friends are talking about who's dating who and what dress they're going to wear to the prom. None of that matters to me, right? All of that is BS in my mind. I have way bigger issues to deal with, and
Mhm.
I can no longer relate to my peers, right? And so it is very, very common, especially initially, these kids to feel like maybe I don't belong here anymore. Maybe I
Yeah.
do have more in common with the people I was hanging out with when I was being exploited. you know, it was horrific, but at least I knew what was expected of me.
Mm.
Here, when I'm at school, I don't always know what's expected of me. If I misbehave in any little way, I'm yelled at or punished. I can't seem to get anything right. A lot of people want me to, like, be fine. I'm not fine. I don't know if I'll
Yeah.
ever be fine again. And so we also spend a lot of times with these youth really helping them understand this horrific thing happened to you. It does not define who you are. It does not define who you can become. Right now, at this moment, you are 12, 13, 14. It feels like it is everything. When you are 25, 30, 35, it will feel a lot smaller. But
Yeah.
nothing is going to make it feel smaller except for time and working through it. And that's
Mhm.
really hard to work through it. But
Yeah.
we have seen kids that have gone through, gone to college, gotten degrees. Sometimes they're giving back, sometimes they're doing something totally different. That can exist for you. We can be here and we can support you, but we're not going to tell you it's going to be easy. And we're
Yeah.
not going to tell you that it's going to that there aren't going to be moments or periods of setback. What we're going to say is that we're going to still be here when those moments and periods happen, and you can always come back to us.
Absolutely. That level of honesty goes a really long way with children, just so that they understand, like, oh, well, I guess I shouldn't expect for these certain things. Like, I know that these things are going to happen and these people are going to be there for me. That's amazing. Great impact that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. And that's the reality of any relationship, right? And
Yeah.
it's hard for all of us to learn it, right? As we
Right.
grow up, even with my own children, something will happen with their friendship and they'll be like, that's it, I'm not talking to them, we're never going to be friends. Okay, let's talk through this, right?
Right.
That is a
Right.
very normal thing. But if while this is normal development stuff is happening alongside this horrific victimization,
Mm.
and you don't, we'll have kids that will come and say, it was harder to be normal than it was to just go back, right? It
Mm.
was, I didn't, there was so many people were looking at me and they wanted me so much to succeed. And that pressure, I just couldn't handle. And so it was easier for me to go back.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. And so, what Love 146 does, is it something that is done in person? Are these virtual types of programs? And where are you guys located? How can families seek support?
Absolutely. Our survivor care program, working directly with youth who've experienced trafficking, is throughout the state of Connecticut. Again, you
Okay.
would not think that Connecticut is a place where
No.
trafficking occurs, right? We're generally considered a small, relatively well-off state,
Hmm.
relatively white state where just everything people seem to have money and be okay. And that is not true. We have seen trafficking in every single county throughout our state. We have seen trafficking at every single age and all different types of genders. So, trafficking does happen here. Our Not a Number program, which is our prevention education program, that's now taking place in 30 states. So how we do that program is we partner with people on the ground in their state that are already working with kids that want to share this. A lot of time we're with health classes in schools, or we're at after school programs, or detention centers, group home facilities, and we'll train them to implement the curriculum. And the reason we do that is we want those kids to know that there is someone in their own community
Hmm.
who understands. So they, again, as they do prevention, part of prevention is you're usually going to have maybe one or two kids that are going to self-identify in some way. Maybe they haven't experienced trafficking, but they've experienced sexual abuse. Who knows? And we want them to feel like there is somebody, this person in front of me that understands this, that I can go to if I need help.
Got you. Okay. And so, along the lines of trafficking, I know that there are times when youth want to take legal action against those traffickers. What kind of support does Love 146 provide or can provide? And how do you balance that legal reporting with trauma informed care?
Oh, yes, yes. That's always such a good question, the legal reporting and the trauma
Hmm.
informed care. So we are mandated reporters.
Yeah.
And as you know, we do have to make reports. We're very open and honest with our youth from the very get-go that we're mandated reporters, and explain what that means, which for those of you who are listening who don't know, that really means that if we believe or have information that a child has been abused or neglected, we have to report that to the child welfare system. And if they find that there's enough evidence, they then need to report that to law enforcement. So, a lot of times when we do have to make those reports, youth know, or we tell them, or we talk to their parents and we let them know, hey, we want to let you know this is what we heard. We can't always do that, but when we can, we do, because we do want to have a long ongoing relationship with this person.
Yeah.
You know, Trafficking is one of those things that is unfortunately very hard to prosecute,
Hmm.
right? It is very difficult to prove the case. It is the reason that you see a lot more organized crime moving towards trafficking of humans, because it has less mandated sentences than drug trafficking or arms trafficking. You don't get as severe of a penalty, and it's much harder to prove. You don't have, the actual physical
There's no
evidence. You have
evidence.
a person who oftentimes has a trauma response. Their memory might be spotty. They may not
Hmm.
want to go through. They might not want to testify. There's so many compelling reasons that make prosecuting these cases so difficult. When we do have enough, and we do have a youth that is interested in providing kind of the information, and we will support them. So we'll go with them to their interviews with law enforcement, their interviews with prosecutors. We'll go with them into the courtroom. We'll help them if they need help creating a victim witness statement or a victim statement for sentencing and for other things. But I will say we have some amazing prosecutors that we work with, and oftentimes the prosecutors, their goal is to plead out the case so that they can really protect that child from having to testify. Unfortunately, that sometimes means that the case doesn't get formally tried as a trafficking case and gets pled down to something lighter, which is very frustrating, I know, for many of us. But
Hmm.
it does save that child having to testify. And kind of when you're balancing everything, making sure that you don't re-traumatize a child is a pretty, compelling reason to plead out a case if you feel it's necessary.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to talk for a minute about barriers. So, in any form of care and working with people, there are going to be barriers and things that people are not able to, to overcome to get assistance. In many cases, it's access, may not be able to get to, a Love 146 person or even transportation to be able to get away from a trafficker. How does Love 146 remove those barriers? And what is that relationship? How do you keep a relationship consistent with a social worker? How is that consistent for healing?
Yeah, so that's a really important part of our program. So we are community based, meaning all of our social workers are out in the community. They basically live out of their cars. They go and they meet with the youth in their homes, in their placements. They'll pick them up from school. They'll take them to different activities they might have. And our motto is we go where you go. So a lot of our youth are either system involved, meaning they're in foster care placements, or they have parents that might move, or they might go and live with different family members. Sometimes they'll be hospitalized for a period for suicidal ideation. That same social worker follows them no matter where they move or live within the state. So we might have a social worker who, the first time they come in contact with a youth, they're living at home. And then, that's not home's not able to stabilize them. They end up inpatient in a hospital. And then they're released and they want to do an outpatient program, right? That same social worker follows them, which is really critical because oftentimes when you move geographically, you lose a lot of your other service providers, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll have a new provider and they think they're coming to you with this great new idea of like, let's do narrative trauma therapy. And you're like the third person who's done this with this child, right? So like they're over this. They don't want to tell their story anymore. They don't want to write it down. It's not that they're being defiant or not non-compliant with your services, but you're just not meeting that youth where they're at. That provider wouldn't know that unless there was somebody to help them understand where they're at. And so oftentimes we provide that consistency. We also have a motto of we never close a case. So no matter what, a youth can reach out to us for the rest of their life. And over half of the youth we are reaching out back to us. Sometimes it's because they want us to attend their graduation or attend a wedding, or, they just got pregnant and they're going to have a baby shower. But sometimes it's because, they're going to be homeless in 2 weeks and they don't know what to do, or that relationship that they thought was really healthy is not really healthy. And now maybe they are open to therapy, or they need help with their food insecure or something. And so sometimes we'll get back into their lives. We do have a transitional services program that helps with youth as they age into adulthood. And sometimes we'll connect them with other providers that might be more beneficial to whatever issue they're specifically having and they need support with.
Wow, I really love that the cases are never closed, and that you can get to see the transition. I know working within the school system and child protective services before that, many times I would work with children, work with their families, and then they're gone. And it's almost kind of traumatizing to the provider as well, because you're like, gosh, I want to know like what they're doing. How are they now? Like, what does their life look like? And so to be able to kind of follow them if they would like for you to later on in their lives, it's pretty powerful.
It is. And I will say, I started the program. It was just me. I was supposed to serve the entire state of Connecticut all by myself while I built the program. It was a crazy job description, but I did that about 10 years ago. I still have youth that will reach back out to me 10 years later and talk to me and give me updates. And that's really, really amazing and very special.
It absolutely is. I have many of my former foster children who had been in some situations have found me on Facebook and social media. So it is really comforting to see just kind of the fruits of your labor and the work that you're doing in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for listeners who want to be a part of the solution, whether they're parents, educators, clinicians, advocates, anybody who may want to bring the curriculum to their own school system or their own area, what can they do to prevent trafficking and support Love 146's mission?
Yeah, so our website is a great place to start. Our website is love146.org. And it has a lot of information about our curriculum, about what we do, about how you can support us through donations. I will note that, our funding, we really do heavily rely on individual donations. And that's because, as you guys might know, you can get grants and those are great, but they usually have a lot of restrictions around them. And a lot of things that we do, like we're an incentive-based program. So we celebrate youth as they're achieving their care plan goals. And we expose them to new activities where they can maybe get that adrenaline rush in a safe way. Those things are oftentimes not covered with our grants. And as well as kind of, if we show up at a kid's house and they don't have food in their refrigerator, we're going to fill that refrigerator with food, things like that. So that's all. The other thing that I would say, in addition to those things, is that, talking with your friends, normalizing these type of conversations, I think is really important. I remember I was, on the green listening to a concert in my neighborhood, and someone who knows what I do sat down and goes next to me and goes, "So Erin, you really think that there's a pedophile in our community?" He's looking around at really nice grass mown and all these people. And I said, "I know there's a pedophile in our community." And he goes, "Really? Who?" And I said, "I don't know. That's the problem." Right. Yeah. But really helping people understand, not in a scary way, but this is the reality. We have to start talking with our kids about internet safety. We have to start talking about, it's not the stranger danger that we all were raised in the 80s with. It can be anyone. And no matter who it is and what it is, I want you to come to me. One of the conversations I think is really important for people to have with their budding adolescents is this idea of, look, there's rules in our house, right? And you're entering an age where your job is to test those rules, and you're going to test me, and you may break some rules, right? I'm not saying I want you to break those rules. Let's be very clear. What I am saying is I understand that may happen. And when that happens, I want you to know that the most important thing is not that you broke that rule. It's your safety. Okay? And so if you need me, I am here for you. No matter what has happened, you can call me. We can figure it out. And if I'm not the person you want to come to, that's also okay. I want you to think about, are there adults in your life that you could go to if anything ever happened and you didn't feel like you could come to me? Who else could you go to? Right? I think a lot of us as parents, we assume our kids know this, but we've never actually verbalized it to them. Right, and I think we also assume our kids will come to us, and we've never made it okay for them to go to another healthy adult. But wouldn't it be better for them to go to an adult than to go to a peer or not go to anybody?
Absolutely.
So I think we need to start having those type of conversations and make them more normal.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that script. I mentioned that I have a preteen son, and we're starting to learn all the things and do all the things. And so that is a conversation that I've started to try to have with him, but it is something that needs to be had, I think, in all, households and even in some schools around, because a lot of times children just don't know who they should talk to and who they should get those answers from. And it then turns into them finding the answers in a way that does not, equal healthy things for them.
Exactly. And the other thing, parents can do, and not even just parents, anyone, and, caregivers, is I'm sure you have children in your life, right? That you care about. And you can offer kind of yourself as a respite. So you can say, if your child has friends over, you can just casually say, you guys, we really care about me and my husband. We really care about you guys. I just want you guys to know you can always come to our house if you ever need a place, we're here if you ever need to talk with someone. We know we're not your parents. We know we're not, you don't have to, but we really do care about each and every one of you. And we want you to know that we're here for you if you need it. Because the truth of the matter is, you might have a safe household, but all of your kids' friends might not live in safe households. And the reassurance that you can give a kid that you've just offered them a place that they can go if things get really bad, it can be a protective factor for that child to know, well, if things get real, I can always go there. I can always talk to so-and-so. And that's a really important thing that we can do to help, again, just really tell kids that there are safe people, there are safe places, even if you might not feel safe right now in your own home or in your community or your sports teams for whatever reason.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you if you had any final thoughts to share with us before leaving, but I think you just did that for me, Erin.
Exactly. Yes. Be kind of share be that safe person for other people and for as many kids as you can be, and as many parents and adults as well. We all need those safe people we can go to in our lives.
Absolutely. And Erin, thank you so much. I have really appreciated you speaking with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it as well.
And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. You can follow us on our social media at Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and more. We're also on YouTube at Behavioral Health Today. And if you like our show, make sure to give us 5 stars and leave us a review. That helps our show get discovered and share the valuable insights in each episode. As always, the resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.